Hello everyone, my name is Adam Lambert and this is Behind the Life podcast, a show where I talk to people from all walks of life to go through their life experiences, journeys and paths they have taken. On the show today, I am going behind the life of Dr Shauna Shapiro. Shauna is a professor at Santa Clara University in California, a best-selling author, clinical psychologist and internationally recognised expert in mindfulness and self-compassion. Shauna has presented her research to figures such as the King of Thailand and the Danish government. She has also delivered presentations to Fortune 100 companies including Google, Procter & Gamble and LinkedIn. Shauna is a graduate of Duke University and a fellow of the Mind and Life Institute, co-founded by the Dalai Lama. Her TEDx talk, The Power of Mindfulness, has been viewed over 1.5 million times. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Behind the Life of Dr. Shauna Shapiro. Dr. Shauna Shapiro, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, Adam.
Fantastic. Behind the Life, so it's a show where I talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, and it's quite a life you have had so far. Regarding mindfulness, when did you adapt that? Was that from childhood, from your family?
So when, it's interesting that you asked me that when no one's asked me about childhood, but actually I remember when I was 5 years old, my father, who was a big time meditator my whole life, sat me down and he said, Shauna, I want you to imagine that there's cars racing through your head. He said, these cars are your thoughts. You don't want to climb in the car and drive away. You just want to see the car, red car, yellow car, blue car. And so that's how he first described meditation to me, is that you're just watching your thoughts. And then of course I never meditated again until I was 17 and I had spinal fusion surgery.
Yes.
I had had scoliosis my whole life and it got dramatically worse where my spine was going to puncture my lungs. And so my orthopedic surgeon said, we need to operate. And, here I was, this healthy, active teenager, and I was star of my volleyball team. And I, all of a sudden, was lying in this hospital bed, unable to walk. And my father tried again. He's very persistent. And he gave me a book on mindfulness. And I vividly remember reading the first page of the book and it said, whatever has happened to you, it's already happened. The important question is, now what? And all of a sudden I realized there was hope, like there was a possibility that I could be happy again, that I could get my life back, because I had been so devastated by the accident and I'm sorry, by the surgery and the physical pain of it, but really the emotional pain was what was really destroying me, because I felt like my life was over. And this book and then the practices really began me on this path of healing and also recognizing that healing was possible.
And so you were recruited by college for netball. Was that correct before you obviously had to go and have back surgery?
Exactly. Right. So I was supposed to play volleyball at Duke University. I'd actually already signed to go. And then I had the surgery. So I actually never played volleyball again. And there, there were many months of rehabilitation where I was not able to walk on my own and was in a hospital bed for 6 months. And so I had a lot of time to investigate my mind and to read and it was interesting because all of my early, studying was through just reading. The internet was different then and we didn't have iPhones. And so I was just reading books upon books. And a few years later, when I was fully healed and recovered, I went to Thailand to actually go to a real monastery with real monks and study meditation. And it was so very different than reading about it. It's like reading a menu versus eating a delicious meal. It's so incredibly different. And that's really where I learned a tremendous amount, was that first kind of 2-week silent retreat of practice.
So did you carry on at Duke University to graduate, or because of the injury?
I did. I went to Duke University, and I graduated summa cum laude, which is
Okay.
kind of the highest honors. Probably because my life changed so radically. I had a lot of time to study, and I had been perhaps not as studious when I was in high school. And in college, I was the one that was there at 8 a.m., raising my hand, sitting in the front row.
Yeah.
And, it was very different than high school. But I learned a tremendous amount. And I'm so grateful for those years, because I became fascinated both from a scientific lens and also from an experiential one of what happens when we meditate, what happens when we practice these pathways of compassion or joy, or even learning just how to be with pain or anxiety. And it was an incredible time.
So what would you say the difference between mindfulness and meditation is?
Very important question. Thank you. Mindfulness is a way of being. It's a
Okay.
way of living in your life moment to moment. So right now, if you're listening, being mindful means you're present. You're here. You're actually listening to these words. You're hearing my voice. Your mind is open. It's clear and it's kind. Meditation is a way to actually practice mindfulness. So just
Okay.
like going to the gym, we lift weights. It's not really just to be in the gym and lift weights. It's to go home and pick up our child, right? So that we build those muscles. We meditate so that we can cultivate this ability to pay attention in an open, kind way.
So would you say meditation is something you have to learn to teach yourself to do, or could it be, you might just be sat on the sofa over here having a cup of tea and just thinking thoughts through your head?
So meditation can happen in any moment, like you're saying. So
Yeah.
in this moment, well, let me rephrase this. Mindfulness can happen in any moment. So in this moment, I can feel the cup of tea in my hand. I can feel the warmth. I can smell the sense of the tea. I can bring all of my senses into the present moment. I wouldn't really call that a meditation.
Okay.
What that is called is more just practicing mindfulness. The meditation is where you formally sit and you intentionally kind of cut out all other distractions. You close your eyes, and there's hundreds and thousands of types of meditation, but
Yeah.
a basic mindfulness meditation is where you just focus on the breath going in and out of your nose, and you let the breath be your anchor, keeping you in the present moment. And then you begin to notice what arises. So you might notice that your mind wanders, and then you gently bring it back. Or you might notice that there's tension in your shoulder, and you bring your awareness to that and then come back to the breath. So meditation is really about strengthening the mind.
And what would you say, to those people out there who say, well, my lives are far too busy, I've not got time to meditate?
That is a very good question, and that is
Thank you.
usually the typical it's the typical response is I don't have
Yeah.
time. So a couple things. One is the research shows that there's kind of a threshold effect around 12 minutes, and that you really start to see the improvements in your immune function, the shifts in your brain, the increases of happiness, the deepening of sleep quality when you're doing about 12 minutes a day. So it's not a tremendous amount of time. We're talking about 12 minutes.
Yeah.
But what I say to people that I'm working with and to my students and my clients is start with 1 minute. Sit down, close your eyes, set your timer, and see if you can practice just for 1 minute, because these small shifts lead to important changes. And the key is really to make a commitment to yourself and then follow through so you can actually trust yourself.
And that's fascinating to hear. And in relation to mindfulness, what are the physical benefits of mindfulness?
There
Is it
are
endless
many
list?
physical benefits. And I do want to say, I don't believe it's a cure-all. I don't believe that this fixes everything in your life. And I also think it takes practice. But the research is quite compelling. Mindfulness has been shown to decrease stress and anxiety, to improve chronic pain and symptoms of fibromyalgia. It's been shown to enhance our immune functioning and to lengthen our telomeres by increasing this enzyme called telomerase. And our telomeres are the little caps at the end of our DNA, and they really determine how long we live. So it's quite wonderful to have them lengthened. And, the other thing that I think a real benefit of mindfulness is it increases our cognitive capacities. So it increases our ability to focus, to pay attention, to learn, and to remember. And then finally, and I think this is probably the most important thing, is mindfulness increases our compassion for ourselves and other people. It reduces cultural biases and assumptions, and it really enhances our ability to make ethical decisions.
And regarding, cognitive and focus, what you mentioned before, it's said that the mind wanders 47% of the time, which is basically, 1 in 2 people you might see walking down the street who are not mentally present. Why would you say the mind wanders so much?
It's a great question. I have no idea. Research from Harvard shows the mind wanders on average 47% of the time, but through training, you can certainly decrease the level of mind wandering. And I don't think all mind wandering is bad. I think the problem is when it hijacks you. The problem is when you're trying to focus and you read the same paragraph 10 times, or when you're getting distracted, when your child's trying to tell you something important. So the key is really with mindfulness that the word means to see clearly. And all we're trying to do is see clearly what's true, what's happening in the present moment. And when we see clearly, we're able to respond effectively. When our mind is wandering all over the place, right? It's like a monkey swinging from limb to limb. It just goes from thought to thought. We can't see clearly, right? An unstable mind is like an unstable camera. We get a fuzzy picture. This is a quote from Chris Germer that I love. Okay. And so the first part of mindfulness is just learning to train and stabilize our mind in the present moment so we can see clearly. It's just learning how to train our attention. In fact, a lot of people say that time is our most valuable resource. They're wrong. It's our attention. And so mindfulness helps us train our attention. But the key is knowing, what do I want to attend to, right? We're bombarded with information. We have so many choices of where to put our attention. In fact, right now, as you're listening, I'm sure there's people looking at their phones and looking at their Instagram and doing other things. Yes. So it's really important to learn how to focus in a one-pointed way on what's truly important. And I call this your intention. Your intention is what reminds you moment to moment of what you care about. And it's really, why am I paying attention? And why am I choosing this and not this? Why am I listening to this instead of checking my Instagram? Oh yeah, because I want to feel more peace in my life. Or I want to be a better parent. Or I want to have more joy, or I want to find the meaning and purpose in my life. And so then it helps our attention go back to listening instead of getting distracted with Facebook or Instagram or all these other things. So there's 3 parts to mindfulness, and I've just told you 2. There's intention, attention, and the final part is your attitude, which is, how are you paying attention? Are you paying attention with curiosity, with kindness, or is it with judgment and shame? And what I found as a clinical psychologist working with thousands of people from all different walks of life, right? High-level CEOs and stressed out college students and women with breast cancer, that everyone I work with, literally probably 99.9%, were all saying similar things. They were all talking about this tremendous self-judgment, and I'm not doing it right, and I'm not good enough, and there's something wrong with me. And I knew what they were talking about because I often would feel that way. And what I realized is that this sense of not good enough, this sense of constant judgment, it's universal. And so I started studying shame and judgment. And what I discovered is that they don't work. They don't help us become better people. They don't help us improve. They don't help us exercise more or lose weight or focus more on our studies. What happens when we judge and shame ourselves is it actually shuts down our capacity to learn. it shuttles all of our resources to survival pathways instead of learning pathways. And so we literally rob ourselves of the resources we need to change.
Over here in the UK, the government statistics is 1 in 4 people suffer from mental health, and over in the States, it's 1 in 6. Issues such as depression, anxiety. How can mindfulness help to combat this?
Well, mindfulness has been shown to really be a powerful tool in working with mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say is, in terms of, let's say, major depression, there are many good treatments for major depression that are not mindfulness, that, either cognitive behavior therapy or behavioral activation or medication. However, about 2/3 of people or more relapse from depression. And so where mindfulness has been shown to be very effective is something called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for depression, which can actually prevent this relapse. So once someone has gotten better, it's helpful to go through this training to help train the mind in healthy ways, and also to help the mind start to notice when it starts slipping back into that rumination or that negative thinking. And then mindfulness can support you so that you don't relapse into depression. So that's been a wonderful addition to kind of our repertoire of treatments. Mindfulness has also been shown to reduce anxiety, to help with panic attack. And I think the key is to really work with healthcare professionals that are trained in these practices. I also highly recommend mindfulness self-compassion therapy. And there's lots of programs in the UK right now they're doing wonderful work, because a lot of times people think mindfulness is just about paying attention and it's this kind of cold cognitive thing. It's not. Mindfulness, the Japanese kanji for mindfulness is comprised of 2 characters, and the first means attention or presence, but the second means mind or heart. In Asian languages, they're interchangeable. So mindfulness could have been translated as heartfulness. And I think that's a much more accurate way of understanding it. It's really this care and this tending to ourselves.
And regarding, stopping our mind going 1,000 miles an hour, you mentioned before, got to be on Instagram, got to be on Facebook, got to be on Twitter, going around in such a rush, and that can lead to stress, things like insomnia, exhaustion. How should we try and stop this? Is, regarding mindfulness over in the States, is that taught as part of education, when you're a toddler in kindergarten?
It's starting. I do think it would be wonderful if these basic life skills could be taught when we're young, because our mind is much more open and plastic then, although it does continue to learn through our lifetime, and the mind continues to grow and change. So it's never too late. You can learn this in any moment. But wouldn't it be wonderful to be laying down these pathways of awareness and wisdom and compassion when we're young? And one of the areas that I'm most interested is bringing this into education, bringing this to our children, and figuring out a way to do it in a very practical, simple way that's science-based, that's not religious, that's available to people. Because in some ways, it feels like common sense. It just makes sense to be kind. It makes sense to be present. It makes sense to see things clearly so you can respond effectively.
And for all those people out there, I've got a little boy who's 6 years old. A bit of advice for myself and other people listening with, toddlers out there. How can us as parents in your mind, teach our children to have a positive mind frame? And I'm making notes, by the way.
Wonderful question. So yeah, take notes. I did write a book called Mindful Discipline.
Yes.
That is teaching parents how to raise an emotionally intelligent, healthy, thriving child. And one of the keys, I believe, is through practicing yourself. Our children do not learn from our words. They do not learn from what we tell them to do. They learn from being with us. They learn through modeling us. They learn through watching our behaviors constantly. They're always watching us. And so I believe that healthiest, best way to raise our children first is to practice ourselves. And then in the book, we go through different ways to kind of create boundaries and discipline that will actually support your child in a loving way. But I think it's so important for us as parents to take care of ourselves and to practice ourselves.
So what made you write that book then, Shauna?
Well, I was going crazy with my then 5 or 6 year old. I had been divorced a few years before, and single parenting was getting the best of me. And I went to my pediatrician and I said, please help me. And he was so brilliant and so wise. And I said, I think I want to take some of, he understands the child's brain and what to do so well. I said, I think we could merge this with mindfulness and really, really create a book that would help parents. So that is why I wrote that book. And it's funny because my recent book, Good Morning, I Love You, the reason I wrote that book, again, it's all from my life story, is going through that divorce and how hard it was and how painful it was and how much shame and kind of fear I felt. And really this new book is this discovery of self-compassion and the path of how to really grow this kindness toward ourselves. And so the book includes mindfulness and self-compassion practices. It includes a ton of science, but I made it very fun and interesting. And then stories that people can really begin to see how this applies to their life and then have the tools to really begin to make these changes. Oh, that's really the key of the book is that it's never too late, that no matter what has happened to us, no matter what mistakes we've made or what pain we've experienced, it's never too late to literally re-architect our brain and live happier, healthier lives.
So, how did you deal with going through divorce? And I said, raising a child as a single parent. What practices did you put in place for your mindfulness? That's quite a deep question.
I had many practices in place. I did have many practices and lots of support, and still I found it devastating. And one of my teachers saw how I would wake up every morning with this kind of pit of fear and anxiety and judgment and how come I couldn't work this out. And, and so she said, I think you should start practicing some self-love. She goes, how about saying, I love you, Shauna, every day? And I was like, no way. That just felt so inauthentic and woo-woo. And she saw my hesitation and she said, how about just saying, good morning, Shauna? When you wake up, try putting your hand on your heart. It releases oxytocin. She knew the science would win me over. And so the next morning I woke up, I took a breath, put my hand on my heart, and I said, good morning, Shauna. And it was kind of nice, right? Instead of the avalanche of fear and self-judgment, I greeted myself with kindness. And I continued to do that every day. And I started noticing subtle shifts, a little bit less harshness, a little bit more kindness.
And do you still do that today?
Well, as I continued to practice, I actually some months later, it was my birthday, and I went to do my Good Morning, Shauna practice, and this image of my grandmother came to me, and I felt her love. And before I knew it, I was saying, good morning, I love you, Shauna. And it was as if the dam around my heart burst and this tremendous self-love poured in. And, I wish I could tell you that every day since then has been this bubble of self-love and I've never felt shame again. And that's not true. But what is true is this pathway of kindness was established and it continues to grow.
Well, you talked about this in your TED Talk, which is fantastic. And I recommend anybody out there to go in and listen to it, because it was quite a deep moment when you were mentioning about, putting your hand on your heart and saying, I love you. How did you feel about doing your TED Talk? Because it's been huge, over 1.5 million hits out there.
I feel really grateful that this message has reached 1.5 million people. It just it's kind of, I'm in awe of the fact that 1.5 million people have practiced and learned Good Morning, I Love You. And the ripple effects have been tremendous. I've received hundreds of emails from people sharing how this practice has impacted their lives. And I just feel really grateful to be able to do this work. And I know we're coming to the end of our time, and
Yes.
I just really want to offer to people listening this new book, Good Morning, I Love You, Mindfulness and Self-Compassion Practices to Rewire Your Brain. And in fact, in the UK, it's called Rewire Your Mind, because apparently Good Morning, I Love You doesn't translate into British.
Right, okay. I don't know why that is. That makes sense.
A little bit of a tongue in cheek, but it's called Rewire Your Mind, and it's available starting March 12th in the UK. And the intention of this book, similar to my TED Talk, is really to spread these practices in an accessible way that's science-based, that people can really bring into their lives and feel significant change.
That's wonderful, Shauna. And what I'll do is I'll pull the links to your website and the books, which are going to be available on Amazon over here. So everybody can, be able to go and check out and go read the book as well. Just, one final question, and Shauna, if you could go back to the teenage you, what we talked about at the start, when you were in hospital after your surgery, probably maybe one of the lowest moments of your life, what would you go back and say to yourself now?
Oh, I love that question. I would say, oh, sweetheart, it's okay. You're going to be okay. There's nothing wrong with you. I think we so often feel like this is it. I'm stuck here. This is my life. And I wish that I had known that all the beautiful things that were to come, that it's never too late. And truthfully, when I have a hard time now, which I still do, I say that to myself. I found that wise, loving voice that is always on my team taking care of me.
I've got to say thank you so much for coming onto the show. We've had a limited amount of time, I know, but so far, you've had a remarkable life, a remarkable career. I really hope your book sells well, and I look forward to reading it when it's available and then reading much more of your works in the future. So thank you for coming on Behind the Life.
Thank you so much, Adam. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. And that was another episode of Behind the Life podcast with myself, Adam Lambert. Please give me a follow on Instagram at Behind the Life Podcast, Facebook, Behind the Life Podcast, and if you listen to this on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button below as well as the like button. I'll be back soon for another episode. For now, take care.